Hello and most welcome to 1320C. We will now close the opening on logic and attunement by Edward Witherspoon, and we went into the chapter of Graham Priest. I will make a slight repetition in another lecture and come to a conclusion. But today I will finish off the reading. We were talking about logica ens. Finally, Heidegger's philosophy has no place for logica ens. The set of timeless truths regarding what really follows from what. For Heidegger to embrace the idea of logica ens is to suppose that it is possible for Dasein to get outside its own moods of thought. So as to be able to contemplate what is really the case. Apart from anything that Dasein takes to be the case. Such a sideways on perspective on our own thought is a fiction. Priest's willingness to embrace contradictions make him look like an ally of Heidegger's rejection of the sovereignty of classical logical systems. Indeed, the dialectic logical metaphysics that Priest advocates initially looks to be a promising solution to the conundrum Heidegger faces as a consequence of his thesis 1 to 3. but the fundamental differences in the scope and basis of their respective inquiries entail that priest's way of revising logical principles cannot be Heidegger's. To find a model for how Heidegger might wish to revise logic, we will have to look elsewhere. Wittgenstein on logic. Wittgenstein might seem to offer little aid and comfort to Heidegger's way of doing philosophy. Heidegger frames his whole project as a metaphysical investigation of being. Almost any page of Heidegger's writings is full of neologisms and jargon as he attempts to plumb the depths of being. By contrast, Wittgenstein says that the essence of things already lies open to view. And becomes survivable through a process of ordering. He offers this description of his philosophical method what we do is to bring words back from their metaphysical to their everyday use. Philosophical investigation, paragraph 116. Wittgenstein does not envision rejecting the principle of non-contradiction. Heidegger at least contemplates doing so. But on a closer examination, we will find that Wittgenstein's description of the relation between language and logic and human activity aligns him with Heidegger's Dasein first approach to metaphysics. Like Heidegger, Wittgenstein is not advocating one logic as formal system among others. But is trying to understand the status of formal systems vis-à-vis the rest of language. This leads him to explore the notion of attunement. This notion would provide a key for describing the connection between anxiety and Heidegger's challenge to the sovereignty of logic. Like Heidegger, Wittgenstein is suspicious of the notion of logica ens. If there were such a thing, it would define what configurations of reality were possible, and so would set parameters of what we could experience. It would be the logic that Wittgenstein describes as a structure of crystalline purity. Thinking is surrounded by nimbus. Its essence, logic, presents an order. Namely, the a priori order of the world. That is the order of possibilities, which the world and thinking must have in common. But this order, it seems, must be utterly simple. It is prior to all experience. must run through all experience. No empirical cloudiness or uncertainty may attach to it. It must rather be of the purest crystal. But this crystal does not appear as an abstraction, but as something concrete. Indeed, as the most concrete, as it were, the hardest thing there is. Philosophical Investigations, paragraph 97. This way of thinking about logic as a crystalline structure dictating the a priori order of the world and of thought. Has a powerful appeal. But Wittgenstein thinks that is a myth. To see why, we may begin by considering what this structure is supposed to do. At a minimum, it is to provide strict and clear rules for the logical construction of a proposition, PI 102. And to determine the logical relations among propositions. To specify what follows from what inferences are correct, and what incorrect. But a system of logical rules cannot deliver determinations of correctness and incorrectness by itself. Its rules have to be understood and applied by us. This will require us to determine whether something falls under a rule. Whether one instance is relevantly similar to another instance. Whether a particular individual falls under a given concept. And so on. For a formal system of rules to yield usable conclusions, thinkers must be able to agree on such judgments. Wittgenstein argues that recognizing this fact will lead us to reconceive the character of logic. It is not only in agreement in definitions, but also, odd as it may sound, agreement in judgments that is required for communication by means of language. This seems to abolish logic, but does not do so. It is one thing to describe methods of measurement, and another to obtain and state results of measurement. But what we call measuring is partly determined by a certain constancy in results of measurement. And philosophical investigations 242. Wittgenstein distinguishes agreement in definitions from agreement in judgments, and says that both kinds of agreement are required for communication by means of language. Why might this claim sound odd? And why does it seem to abolish logic? if you have a conception of logic as an a priori system that determines the possibilities of thought and of reality, then you should think that all that we need to secure communication is agreement in definitions. Let's assume that communication between two people is a matter of their changing linguistic expressions to which they assign the same meanings. On the conception of logic at issue, such communication is achieved when speakers assign the same meanings to the component words of their expressions. Logic in this sense may be thought of as a syntax that enables them to derive the meaning of whole expressions from the meanings of their parts. Whether the communicators go on to assign the same truth values to the same statements, that is, whether they agree in their judgments. Is irrelevant to whether they have a shared understanding. When Wittgenstein says that agreement in judgments is required for communication, he is therefore rejecting this conception of logic. And this is why his remark seems to abolish logic. Agreement in judgment is often a contingent matter. Different speakers might assign different truth values to a given proposition for all kinds of reasons. Different experiences, different background beliefs, different degrees of skill in reasoning, even different values, theoretical and moral. If what our expressions mean turns out to depend on whether we agree, then it looks as though logic as what establish the meanings of and logical relations among our propositions is being made to depend on contingencies, and that is to abolish logic. is agreement in judgments required for communication in language. Wittgenstein presents his argument through an analogy with measuring. In this analogy, describing methods of measurement is likened to establishing the definitions and logical rules that together yield specifications of the meanings of sentences. Obtaining and stating results of measurement would then be like using language to communicate. In the case of measuring, we expect different measurers to get the same results. To achieve a certain constancy in the results, indeed, Wittgenstein says that these agreements in results partly determine what measuring is. Think about how we react when measurers get different results. when the difference is within a tolerable margin of error. We just think this is to be expected and move on. But if the difference is significant, we look for an explanation. Perhaps the measurers were careless. On their instruments were miscalibrated. But if significant differences could not be explained in such a way, or if they were persistent or extreme, we would not judge that these agents were measuring. Even if they were going through the motions of measuring, following procedures as they call them. It would be hard to understand what they were doing. Even if we could come to understand their pseudo measuring activity, it would have a role in their lives very different from the rule of measuring has in ours. Put me some coffee. Similarly, agreement in judgments is the expected consequence of our establishment of shared language. That is, we will agree about when a statement in the language is true and when false. What happens when we disagree? We look for an explanation. Perhaps there are differences in our background beliefs. Or in our experiences. Or perhaps the discrepancy arises from differences in the care we take in reasoning, or the meanings we assign to our expressions. Finding such explanations can secure agreement in judgments at a deeper level. Even when our initial judgments diverge. But if you cannot agree in our judgments at some level, if you insist on saying it is night when I say it's day, there's no accounting for the difference, then we are not communicating. The idea that logic has fixed the meaning of our utterances, even though we disagree so thoroughly, gets no grip here. Or to reformulate the conclusion, if we are communicating, then we will largely agree in our judgments. There is another dimension of the dependence of communication on agreement in judgments. For, at another level, agreement in judgments is not just the necessary consequence of communication. It also makes communication possible. This dimension emerges from Wittgenstein's reflections on rule following. Language use is a normatively structured activity. And our sharing norms depends on our agreeing at a level that goes deeper than simply accepting a body of rules. we can bring out this aspect of agreement by considering one of Wittgenstein's most famous thought experiments, which I would call the fable of the wayward pupil. The pupil has been taught to write series of integers according to the instruction plus n. And has been tested on series carried as high as 1,000. Now we order him to continue the series plus 2, and he writes 998, 1,000, 1,004, 1,008, 1,012. We say to him, look what you're doing. He doesn't understand. We say, you should have added 2. Look how you began the series. He answers, yes, isn't it right? I thought that was how I had to do it. Or suppose he pointed to the series and said, But I did go on in the same way. It would now be no use to say, but can't you see? And go over the old explanations and examples for him again. Because the pupil finds it natural to continue the series in a wayward fashion. Our communication with him is blocked, at least at the moment, and in this regard. There is no more fundamental level of principles the pupil must accept. And to which we could appeal to him to get him to the correct continuation. This does not mean that there is no way to teach him to continue the series correctly. But just that such teaching will take a form different from drawing out the consequences of his prior commitments. To communicate with someone else, we have to agree on a wide range of things. At a fundamental level, we have to agree that vocables or inscriptions that are in some respects different because spoken in different vocal registers or in different accents, or because written in different hands or fonts, are in the relevant sense the same. We have to agree that going on from 1,000 to 1,002 to 1,004 is going on in the same way as going from 100 to 102 to 104. The idea of the wayward pupil surprises us into recognizing the multifarious dimensions of agreement in judgment that are presupposed in something as clearly defined as continuing the series. In his reflections on Wittgenstein, Stanley Cavell gives an indication of the range of these agreements. We learn and teach words in certain contexts, and then we are expected and expect others to be able to project them into further contexts. Nothing ensures that this projection will take place. In particular, not the grasping of universals, nor the grasping of books, of rules. Just as nothing ensures that we will make and understand the same projections. That, on the whole, we do is a matter of our sharing roots of interest and feelings. Modes of response, senses of humor and of significance and of fulfillment. Of what is outrageous, of what is similar to what else, what a rebuke, what forgiveness, and of when an utterance is an assertion, when an appeal, when an explanation, all the world of organism, Wittgenstein calls forms of life. Human speech and activity, sanity and community rest upon nothing more but nothing less than this. This sharing of sensibilities, this world of organism, is what, in the claim of reason, Cavell describes as mutual attunement in judgments. The idea of agreement here is not that of coming to or arriving at an agreement on a given occasion, but of being in agreement throughout, being in harmony, like pitches or tones or clocks or weighing scales or columns of figures that a group of human beings stimmen in their language überein. Says, so to speak, that they are mutually voiced with respect to it, mutually attuned, top to bottom. Cavell, 1979, page 32. What is the conception of logic that this leaves us with? For Wittgenstein, our ordinary language has a grammar. A rich and nuanced web of conceptual relations among its possible propositions. This grammar is reflected in our judgments regarding the implications of its propositions and how they are connected to evidence and action. A logic as formal system is an abstraction from the grammar of our language. A formal system is clear and certain, crystalline, if you will. Free from ambiguity, readily teachable, capable of delivering definite verdicts as to which inferences are correct and which incorrect. Such a system aspires to command assent the way 1,000 plus 2 equals 1002 commands ascent. It has these features. Because we have built them into it. We would not accept a logic as formal system that lacked them. A logic as formal system is a priori, not because it commands us from the Platonic heights of Logika ens, but because it presents in perspicuous form the commitments already implicit in our concepts. Accordingly, our grammar is the source and touchstone of any analysis in terms of logic as formal system. Cavell asks, how does the logician know that 1. Nobody is in the auditorium, must be transcribed differently from 2. Peabody is in the auditorium. The answer Cavell finds in Wittgenstein is that the logician draws on his knowledge of what we ordinarily mean in using an expression. Or the knowledge of the particular circumstances in which an expression is actually used. Since logic as formal system expresses necessary relations among propositions, it can look as though Wittgenstein's conception of the relation between logics as formal system and language leaves the notion of necessity insufficiently grounded, as though what is necessary depended on what we believe to be necessary. Cavell expresses this worry as follows. Wittgenstein's philosophy provides, one might say, an anthropological or even anthropomorphic view of necessity, and that can be disappointing. As if it is not really necessity which has given an anthropological view of. As though if the a priori has a history, it cannot really be the a priori in question. The fact is that the a priori does have a history. Logics as formal systems that were accepted by our ancestors had been replaced by different and incompatible formal systems. This is not just a matter of replacing unwieldy or less powerful formal systems with ones that do more. For example, Aristotelian syllogistic regarded inferences as valid that we now regard as committing the existential fallacy. This is not truth replacing error, but instead a realignment of our concepts. In this case, the content of universal categorical propositions that is akin to a Kuhnian paradigm shift. But the fact that the concept of necessity has a history should not make us think that the grammar from which it is derived is arbitrary or merely conventional. Or simply a reflection of psychological propensities to connect one concept with another. Our concepts reflect our form of life, the kind of creature we are. They evolve as our form of life evolves, with the kind of inner logic that we see in the emergence of one genre of music from another. Or in the transition from one political order to another. These changes may not be predictable, but they are neither random nor matters of unfettered decision, nor expressions of mere psychological tendencies. Though it is true that if people made different decisions, or had different psychologies, our concepts would be different. We may summarize this area of Wittgenstein's thought by saying that our being able to communicate depends on our being mutually attuned. On our agreeing in our judgments of sameness and difference, similarity and dissimilarity, and so on, so that we can agree in the application of our words. A logic as a formal system is derived from the grammar embedded in our language. So it too depends on our attunements. And these attunements are malleable in some dimensions. They spring from the special biological endowment of Homo sapiens, and they are shaped by education and culture. By our individual experiences and psychologies. This last observation on the malleability of our attunements will provide a key for interpreting Heidegger. Anxiety as attunement. We are now in a position to offer an interpretation of Heidegger's attitude toward logic in What is Metaphysics? As I argued above, Heidegger's investigation of being in being and time yields the inconsistency expressed in thesis 1 to 3. But it is not until what is metaphysics that Heidegger explicitly broaches the possibility of overthrowing logic. What moves Heidegger against logic in What is Metaphysics appears at first to be something utterly different from the status of being. Namely, the status of what Heidegger calls the nothing. But as it turns out, the nothing and being are intimately connected. What is Metaphysics starts with Heidegger's observation that science requires a special attitude in which Dasein submits itself to entities, letting them have the first and last word. Metaphysics seeks to understand the relationship of scientific Dasein to entities, to understand and explain how entities are revealed for scientific investigation. Heidegger claims that this revelation takes place through a fundamental experience of Dasein. This is anxiety, an attunement in which Dasein encounters the nothing. In the clear night of the nothing of anxiety, the original openness of entities as such arises, that they are entities and not nothing. This encounter is supposed to explain the possibility of science. But raises a paradox structurally parallel to the paradox of being. For the nothing is not an entity. Accordingly, it does not make sense to say that the nothing is this or does that. Yet Heidegger also appears to make many assertions about the nothing. For example, that the nothing is that in the face of which Dasein has anxiety. The nothing is and is not. Indeed, for Heidegger, the nothing and being are linked by more than the parallel conundrums that attend attempts to philosophize about them. Experiencing the nothing brings Dasein face to face with being. being manifests itself only in the transcendence of a Dasein that is held out into the nothing. Nothing are therefore the same. Accordingly, we may take the problem of talking about the nothing to be the same as the problem of talking about being. As I remarked above, Heidegger's response to this paradox is fundamentally different from Priest's superficially similar response. Priest weighs the theoretical costs and benefits of retaining versus rejecting the principle of non-contradiction. By contrast, Heidegger describes in evocative but elusive detail Dasein's experience of the nothing. His argument is not that we should reject the principle of non-contradiction in order to solve metaphysical problems regarding being and the nothing. That may be true, in Heidegger's opinion, but the case for allowing self-contradictory talk about the nothing is based not on theoretical considerations, but rather on what experience reveals to us. Heidegger even claims that the legitimacy of his metaphysical investigation can be demonstrated only on the basis of a fundamental experience of nothing. And here I conclude logic and attunement and the comparison between Graham Priest, Wittgenstein and Martin Heidegger, and I will come up with a aspect and sort of conclusion later on. But since this was rather complicated, I think I will give it a rest for a day or two. Thank you very much for attending and have a very pleasant morning. Bye bye.